It feels like RPGs are really starting to pick up on the PC Engine. Susano-ou Densetsu is one of the more unusual RPGs I've encountered going through these Japanese game libraries. There's only one set of games that I can really compare it to, and those games were notoriously bad. Susano-ou Densetsu is mostly just different. Susano-ou is the Japanese god of the storms, a figure that is sometimes heroic, sometimes destructive, but very significant. Susano-ou doesn't appear in the game. The actual backstory is a lot more complicated. It really starts in 1979 with a comic called Susano-ou. It was made by legendary creator Go Nagai, and the basic concept is that a teenage punk has a chance encounter with some psychic kids and winds up developing his own enormous, uncontrollable psychic abilities. It comes to a rather abrupt end, with vast evil unleashed, the world effectively destroyed, and the hero undergoing transfiguration into something else. Go Nagai claimed that this was the intended ending, but in 1985 he created a sequel series, Susano-ou Densetsu, and that story leaned into making the psychics the equivalent of Japanese gods. The plot of the game, Susano-ou Densetsu, fits into that series. The hero Susa's abilities run a bit out of control, and 3 demons emerge from his psyche. The process leaves him weakened, but he still feels obligated to stop them. So he wanders the post-apocalyptic landscape created by his own psychic battles, hunting for the demons of earth, water, and air. I always have a bit of a problem when I'm playing RPGs for these videos, because my time is limited, and they're usually a very slow burn to start out with. This is true of Susano-ou Densetsu, but in some ways, it's an even slower burn than I expected. I spent an awful lot of time just figuring out basic systems here. I also went in the completely wrong direction after I felt I was ready to move on from the starting area, and so I wound up missing a lot of story events. Susano-ou Densetsu has a lot of scripted storytelling, but you have to go to the correct places in order to trigger it, and I didn't. How much you can level up is actually limited by the story, so you'll want to keep an eye on the level cap just to make sure that you are not wasting your time. While you're walking around, hit the 1 button to bring up a menu, and here you've got the options to talk, use a psychic ability, use an item, change your equipment, or view your stats. You can only see a small section of your abilities at once, so you'll need to hit the A button to go through all of the screens, and this is where you can find the level cap. There are only 8 psychic powers in the game, though most of them can be leveled up multiple times. If you want to use level 2 or higher of a psi power, then you have to use right and left on the control pad to select it. The powers are pretty much what you'd expect: damage one enemy, damage all enemies, heal somebody, warp to a town that you visited. Nothing too surprising. In town, if you visit bars, you can encounter a lot of patrons, and some of them will have price tags next to them. These characters are mercenaries that you can hire to help you on your quest. You can bring 2 of them along with you, but they have a couple of weaknesses. First, you have to keep them fed. Susano-ou Densetsu is one of those early RPGs where you have to carry supplies around for your party, which means buying food from a butcher. If you run out of food, then people start losing health. Fortunately, food is cheap and plentiful, so you can stock up quite a bit. But as your party grows, more food will get consumed. The other weakness of mercenaries is that they don't level up. You get what you pay for with them, but no more than that. Something you may spot if you're familiar with Go Nagai's work is that some of the mercenaries are taken from some of his other stuff, particularly Violent Jack, which is a series that crosses over with pretty much everything he's done. When you're wandering around outside of town, you'll notice 2 different things. First, there is a passage of time, a day-night cycle, and if you enter towns at different times of the day, you'll encounter different things. The other thing is that you'll see little enemies appear on the map. Touching one of these initiates a fight, and what you wind up fighting isn't really represented by the enemy that you touch on the world map. Combat is played from a tactical view. Your party is placed toward the center of the screen, and enemies will rush into their initial positions. Every character gets a certain number of action points. You can spend these to move, attack, or use a psychic ability. Movement's a little bit strange, because you can move one square even when you don't have any action points left. Attacking can be a bit strange because different weapons have different attack patterns. One of the first things you can get is a bowgun, and that can shoot anyone anywhere. On the other hand, this guy starts out with a staff that attacks all of the enemies around him. How many action points you get is dependent on your stats. And like in most games, taking more actions is far more powerful than any other option. Once you can do 2 actions to anyone else's 1, the advantage really settles on you. You'll notice terrain in the combat, but the terrain doesn't do anything. You can freely walk through water here. Defeating an enemy gets you a bit of experience and gold, and after you've defeated all of them, you can find out if you've leveled up. While you're wandering in the wilderness, you have an additional menu command, and that's to set up camp. In camp, you can choose to rest, which will use up some of your food in exchange for HP, and you also can rearrange your party's formation, choosing to keep them in close, or where to position them around you. If you don't want to consume food, you could always go to a hotel in town, and besides restoring your health and mental energy, this is where you go to get a password. The password system in Susano-ou Densetsu is especially weird. You need to write down your level, gold, experience, how many medical herbs you've got, and how much food you're carrying. Then you have a short password below that. And all of those numbers plus your code is what you have to enter in order to restart the game. On the one hand, it's nice to have something associated with the password that will tell you where you are in the game. On the other, that is a weirdly complicated password system. One quirk for the password system, though, is that after you beat the game, they'll give you the strongest password. That is to say, a password with everything maxed out. And then they'll let you go through the game again, just steamrolling everything. This was the only video game based on Susano-ou, though there's also a board game out there. Yeah, the board game honestly looks pretty awful. This is a game that seems to have a rather mixed response in Japan. It's not especially well known, but there are fans of the original who think back on it fondly because the game acts as a bit of a continuation. Now, without having gotten into it too deeply, my feeling on Susano-ou Densetsu is that it's a game that's trying a lot of things, but none of them quite work as well as you'd want them to. There aren't any real tactical considerations in combat, and your opponents are dumb as posts. The food adds some survival mechanics, but they're easily reduced to nothing because you just buy enough food to last you forever. And the setting doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be. Is it a post-apocalyptic wasteland? Or feudal Japan? All in all, the game feels half-baked. Of course, this was a time for a lot of experimentation in RPGs, and sometimes the experiments just didn't really work.